and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I'm here to share a big book haul with you all. So this is a haul of about 15 books that I picked up from my mom when I was visiting this summer. My mom actually works at a bookstore, so she ends up bringing lots of books home with her, and she had a big stack of ones that she had read and wanted to get rid of for my sister and I to go through, and these are the books that I selected to take home with me. So this is the big stack of books. Oh, it just fits in the screen. I've sorted this stack into historical fiction, mystery, contemporary, and YA, so I will just get started going through and sharing which books I brought home in this haul. So I'll start with historical fiction, and the first book to talk about is The Girl Behind the Wall by Mandy, Robotham. This book is set in Berlin when it was divided into East and West Germany, and the back says, "A city divided. When the Berlin Wall goes up, Karen is on the wrong side of the city. Overnight, she's trapped under Soviet rule in unforgiving East Berlin and separated from her twin sister, Judah. Two sisters torn apart. Karen and Judah live parallel lives for years, cut off by the wall. But Karen finds one reason to keep going. Otto, the man who gives her hope even amidst the brutal East German regime. One impossible choice. When Judah finds a hidden way through the wall, the twins are reunited. But the Stasi have eyes everywhere, and soon Karen is faced with a terrible decision: to flee to the west and be with her sister, or sacrifice it all to follow her heart." So this author has written a couple other kind of like World War II adjacent themed books that I have definitely seen mention of, and then this one obviously is in post-war Germany. It sounds super interesting. My family has always had an interest in divided Berlin, so I'm curious to see what this fictional account of that time period is like. The next one is one that has actually been on my TBR forever, and that is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This is a story about Korean immigrants living in Japan, and it's a multi-generational story, which is why it had kind of been on my radar already. The description for this one says, "History is seldom kind. In Min Jin Lee's best-selling magisterial epic, 4 generations of a poor, proud immigrant family fight to control their destinies, exiled from a homeland they never knew. In the early 1900s, teenage Sunja, the adored daughter of a crippled fisherman, falls for a wealthy stranger at the seashore near her home in Korea. He promises her the world, but when she discovers she is pregnant and that her lover is married, she refuses to be bought. Instead, she accepts an offer of marriage from a gentle, sickly minister passing through on his way to Japan. But her decision to abandon her home and to reject her son's powerful father sets off a dramatic saga that will echo down through the generations. Richly told and profoundly moving, Pachinko is a story of love, sacrifice, ambition, and loyalty. From the bustling street markets to the halls of Japan's finest universities to the pachinko parlors of the criminal underworld, Lee's complex and passionate characters, strong, stubborn women, devoted sisters and sons, fathers, shaken by moral crisis, survive and thrive against the indifferent arc of history." So as we all know, I love a story that traces multiple generations of a family, where we get to see how different relationships and actions impact down through the layers of a family, so I think I'll really enjoy this one. And then the third and final historical fiction title is one that you will have heard me talk about multiple times on this channel, and that is As Bright as Heaven by Susan Meissner. This is one of my favorite books of 2020, so when I saw that my mom had a copy up for grabs, I definitely knew that I wanted to bring it home and add it to my shelves, even though I've already read it. In 1918, Philadelphia is a city teeming with promise. Even as its young men go off to fight in the Great War, there are opportunities for a fresh start on its cobblestone streets. Into the bustling town come Pauline Bright and her husband, filled with the hope they could now give their 3 daughters, Evelyn, Maggie, and Willa, a chance at a better life. Their dreams are short-lived. Just months after they arrive, the Spanish flu reaches the shore of North America. As the pandemic claims more than 12,000 victims in their adopted city, Pauline and her family find themselves in a world that looks nothing like the one they knew. But even as they lose loved ones, they take in a baby orphaned by the disease, who becomes their single source of hope. Amidst the tragedy and challenges that surround them, they learn what they cannot live without and what they're willing to do about it. As Bright as Heaven is the compelling story of a mother and her daughters who find themselves in a harsh world not of their making that will either crush their resolve to survive or purify it. So if you're curious to know more of my thoughts after having read this book, I would recommend my top 5 fiction books of 2020, where I go into my full reaction to this book. Then for the mysteries, the first mystery that I brought home is Death to La Fience by Donna Leon. This is the first book in the Commissario Guido Bernetti mystery series. I haven't read any of the books in this series, But since this is the first one, of course, it's a great place to start, and I'm looking forward, if I enjoy this book, to have another destination-themed mystery series. I love traveling to interesting locations in the mystery books that I read. So the description for this says, "There is little violent crime in Venice, a serenely beautiful floating city of mystery and magic, history and decay. But the evil that does occasionally rear its head is the jurisdiction of Guido Bernetti, the suave, urbane vice commissario of police and a genius at detection. Now all of his admirable abilities must come into play in the deadly affair of Maestro Helmut Wellower, a world-renowned conductor who died painfully from cyanide poisoning during an intermission at La Fience. But as the investigation unfolds, a chilling picture slowly begins to take shape, a detailed portrait of revenge painted with vivid strokes of hatred and shocking depravity. And the dilemma for Guido Bernetti will not be finding a murder suspect, but rather narrowing the choices down to one." So that sounds like a very interesting mystery series that maybe I will have a chance to pick up during Cloak and Dagger Christmas this year. And then the second mystery is a cozy mystery, and that is Of Books and Bagpipes by Paige Shelton. This is part of the Scottish Bookshop mystery series, and the reason that my mom had picked this up is that the mystery focuses around the Orwelly comic books, and my granny used to send our family the compendium of that year's Orwelly comics every year for Christmas. So reading those comic strips are a big part of my childhood memories, and it's just funny to find a book that references that. So the back says, "A small-town bookseller in search of a rare Scottish text finds herself in epic danger in the latest installment of Paige Shelton's sparkling new mystery series." Always up for a literary adventure, Denali Nichols left Kansas to pursue her dream job at the Cracked Spine, a Scottish bookshop specializing in rare manuscripts and other valuable historical objects. So when her boss asks her to retrieve a hard-to-find edition of an Orwelly comic, Delaney is only too eager to please. Even though her trip to Castle Doone outside of Edinburgh ends up being a lot more than she bargained for. While viewing the Highlands from the castle's ramparts, Delaney spots a sandal-clad foot at the other end of the road, one that belongs to the now-deceased man in charge of bringing her the Orwelly. Delaney grabs the pages of the comic book and hides them under her jacket before rushing off to find the police. It's not until she's back at the Cracked Spine that Delaney realizes just how complicated this story really is. Can she untangle the plot and figure out who the killer is before getting herself booked for murder? So obviously I doubt that this is going to be incredible writing, but the allure of reading a book that centers around Orwelly comics and also has a cozy Scottish mystery vibe was just too great to deny, and I'm really excited to read this one. Then for contemporary novels, the first book that I want to talk about is Fresh Water for Flowers by Valerie Perrin. I'll read the flap here. A poignant runaway bestseller full of French charm and memorable characters, Fresh Water for Flowers is Valerie Perrin's English language debut. Violet Toussaint is the caretaker at a cemetery in a small town in Burgundy. Casual mourners, regular visitors, and sundry colleagues, grave diggers, groundskeepers, and a priest, visit her to warm themselves in her lodge, where laughter, companionship, and occasional tears mix with the coffee she offers them. Her life is lived to the rhythms of their funny, moving confidences. Violet's routine is disrupted one day by the arrival of Julien Soule, local police chief, who insists on scattering the ashes of his recently deceased mother on the gravesite of a complete stranger. It soon becomes clear that Julien's inexplicable gesture is intertwined with Violet's own difficult past. With Fresh Water for Flowers, Valerie Perrin has given readers an intimately told story that tugs on the heartstrings, a captivating tale about a woman who believes obstinately in happiness despite it all. Fresh Water for Flowers and Violet will stay with readers for years after they have turned the final page. So I thought that just sounded like a really interesting book. As a genealogist and family historian, I have spent more than my fair time in cemeteries, but it's rare to find them featured as a plot point in books beyond just the setting for a funeral. So I'm intrigued to have a book that is all about a caretaker for a cemetery. Then the next one is actually a multi-timeline book that's going to switch from the current day back to a historical time period, so it's kind of contemporary and historical fiction, and that is the Venice Sketchbook by Rhys Bowen. The description for this book says, "Every picture tells a remarkable story. Carolyn Grant is struggling to accept the end of her marriage when she receives an unexpected bequest. Her beloved great-aunt Letty leaves her a sketchbook, 3 keys, and a final whisper, Venice. Carolyn's quest to scatter Juliet Letty Browning's ashes in the city she loved, and to unlock the mysteries stored away for more than 60 years. It's 1938 when art teacher Juliet Browning arrives in romantic Venice. For her students, it's a wealth of history, art, and beauty. For Juliet, it's poignant memories and a chance to reconnect with Leonardo da Rossi, the man she loves whose future is already determined by his noble family. However star-crossed, nothing can come between them, until the threat of war closes in on Venice and they're forced to fight, survive, and protect a secret that will bind them forever. Key by key, Letty's life of impossible love, loss, and courage unfolds. It's one that Carolyn can now make right again as her own journey of self-discovery begins. I always love dual narrative books, particularly ones that rely on family secrets and kind of going back in time to discover something in your family's past, so I think I will really enjoy this book. Then the next book is this slim little volume, and that is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. And apparently Yoko Ogawa is one of Japan's best-selling authors. I've kind of stumbled into reading books set in Japan this year, so I think it'll be interesting to read a book written by a contemporary bestseller there. The description for this book says, "He is a brilliant math professor with a peculiar problem. Ever since her traumatic head injury, he has lived with only 80 minutes of short-term memory. She is an astute young housekeeper with a 10-year-old son who is hired to care for him. And every morning as the professor and the housekeeper are introduced to each other anew, a strange and beautiful relationship blossoms between them. Though he cannot hold memories for long, his brain is like a tape that begins to erase itself every 80 minutes. The professor's mind is still alive with elegant equations from the past. And the numbers in all of their articulate order reveal a sheltering and poetic world to both the housekeeper and her young son. The professor is capable of discovering connections between the simplest of quantities, like the housekeeper's shoe size, and the universe at large, drawing their lives ever closer and more profoundly together even as his memory slips away. The Housekeeper and the Professor is an enchanting story about what it means to live in the present and about the curious equations that can create a family." So I thought that seemed like a really unique setup for a story, and it looks like there's kind of like little math equations throughout the book. So I'm intrigued by that premise, and like I said, it's so short that it'll be easy to tuck into a TBR in the months to come. And then to continue on with the trend of books set in Japan, I have two more contemporary books set in Japan. The first is The Phone Booth at the End of the World by Imai Messina. This is actually the English language debut of an Italian author who now lives with her Japanese husband in Japan. And the description for this book says, "We all have something to say to those we have lost. When Yui loses her mother and daughter in the tsunami, she wonders how she will ever carry on, and begins to mark time in relation to that terrible day in 2011. Yet, in the face of this unthinkable loss, her life must continue somehow. One day at work, as the host of a call-in radio program, Yui hears a story about a man on Whale Mountain, one of the places worst hit by the tsunami, who has an old telephone booth in his garden with a disconnected phone inside. As news of the phone booth and its wind phone spreads, people start coming from miles around to speak to loved ones, finding comfort in sharing the details of their daily lives with those they have lost. But when Yui, numb with grief, makes her own pilgrimage, she can't bring herself to pick up the receiver. Then she meets Takeshi, a widower whose own daughter has stopped talking in the wake of her mother's death. Inspired by true events, Imai Messina's international best-selling novel, The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World, is a moving, unforgettable story about the depths of grief, the lightness of love, and the human longing to keep the people who are no longer with us close to our hearts." I think the cover of this is absolutely beautiful, and it sounds like an interesting story, and I'm particularly interested in the fact that it's rooted in some reality. I don't know if that is just that it's based around the aftermath of the 2011 tsunami, or if the phone booth and the story around that is also true, so that's something that I'm going to investigate as I read the book. And the next book actually also deals with the aftermath of the 2011 tsunami, and that is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. So this one says, "On a remote island in the Pacific Northwest, a Hello Kitty lunchbox washes up on the beach. Tucked inside is a diary of a 16-year-old Japanese girl named Nyao Yasutani. Ruth, a writer who finds the lunchbox, suspects that it is debris from Japan's 2011 tsunami. Once she begins to read the diary, Ruth quickly finds herself drawn into the mystery of Nyao's fate. Meanwhile in Tokyo, Nyao, uprooted from her home in the US, bullied at school and watching her parents spiral deeper into disaster, has decided to end her life. But first she wants to recount the story of her great-grandmother, a 104-year-old Zen Buddhist nun, in the pages of her secret diary. Full of Ruth Ozeki's signature humor and insight, A Tale for the Time Being deftly blurs the line between fact and fiction." I've seen this book recommended in a number of places because it is partially set in British Columbia. That small island in the Pacific Northwest that's alluded to on the back is somewhere in British Columbia, and I believe the author is also British Columbian. I'm always interested to read more books with a local setting or by local authors because my beautiful province is not one that is featured too often in popular novels. So I'm very interested to read this book, particularly with that local lens being added to it. Then speaking of British Columbian authors and locations, the next book is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. This is one that I've also talked about extensively on the channel and have read and enjoyed earlier this year and just wanted to have a copy for my own collection. The flap for this says, Vincent is a bartender at the Hotel Cayette, a 5-star hotel on the northernmost tip of Vancouver Island. On the night she meets Jonathan Alcaides, a hooded figure scrawls a message on the lobby's glass wall. Why don't you swallow broken glass? Leon Prevent, a shipping executive for Neptune Avarmades, reads the words and orders a drink to calm down. Alcaides, the owner of the hotel and a wealthy investment manager, arrives too late to read the threat, never knowing it was intended for him. He leaves Vincent a $100 tip along with his business card, and a year later they are living together as husband and wife. High above Manhattan, a greater crime is committed. Alcaides is running an international Ponzi scheme, moving imaginary sums of money through clients' accounts. He holds the life savings of an artist named Olivia Collins, the fortunes of a Saudi prince and his extended family, and countless retirement funds, including Leon Prevent's. The collapse of the financial empire is as swift as it is devastating, obliterating fortunes and lives. Vincent walks away from the night until years later she steps aboard a Neptune Avarmades vessel, the Neptune Cumberland, and disappears from the ship between ports of call. In a mesmerizing story of catastrophe and survival, Emily St. John Mandel weaves together the lives of her characters on a ship at sea, among the towers of Manhattan and in the wilderness of remote British Columbia. Rife with unexpected beauty, the Glass Hotel paints a breathtaking picture of greed and guilt, love and delusion, unintended consequences, and the ghosts of our pasts. I think I talked about this one more in my mid-year book freakout tag, so definitely check that out if you're interested to know more of my thoughts about this book. Then the next book is Everybody in This Room Will One Day Be Dead by Emily Austen. The description for this book says, a brisk, hilariously poignant debut novel about the fragility and magic of being alive. Meet Gilda. She cannot stop thinking about death. Desperate for relief from her anxious mind and alienated from her repressive family, Gilda responds to a flyer for free therapy at a local Catholic church, where Father Jeff assumes she's there for a job interview. Caught off guard and too embarrassed to correct him, Gilda is abruptly hired to replace the recently deceased receptionist Grace. It's not the most obvious job. She's queer and an atheist for starters, and so in between trying to learn mass, dodging her new maybe girlfriend, and conducting an amateur investigation into Grace's death, Gilda must avoid revealing the truth of her own mortifying existence. Blending warmth, deadpan humor, and pitch-perfect observations about the human condition, Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead is a crackling exploration of what it takes to stay afloat in a world where your expiration and the expiration of those you love is the only certainty. This sounds like it actually might fall in like the new adult category of books, which is a category that I don't read very many books in, so I'm curious to see if I'm going to enjoy this one. And then the last contemporary novel is A Man Called Ove by Frederik Backman. This is a book that I have seen absolutely everywhere. I know it's been a couple of years since it came out, but I still haven't got around to reading it, and I've heard so many good things from lots of people, both in real life and on Booktube, recommending this book to me. So the description on the back says, Ove is almost certainly the grumpiest man you'll ever meet. He thinks himself surrounded by idiots, joggers, neighbors who can't reverse a trailer properly, and shop assistants who talk in code. But isn't it rare these days to find such old-fashioned clarity of belief and deed, such unswerving conviction about what the world should be and a lifelong dedication to making it just so? In the end, you will see, there's something about Ove that is quite irresistible. I believe this is a book set in Scandinavia, I think maybe Sweden, and I'm always interested to read books about older protagonists because it does seem like those are few and far between, so I think I'll really enjoy A Man Called Ove whenever I do finally get around to reading it. And then the last two books are YA or middle grade books. The first one is Under the Egg by Laura Marx Fitzgerald. This one is a YA mystery focusing around the art world. The back says, only 2 people know about the masterpiece hidden in the Tenpenny home, and one of them is dead. The other is Theodora Tenpenny. When Theo spills a bottle of rubbing alcohol on her late grandfather's painting, she discovers what looks like a priceless masterpiece underneath. That's great news for Theo, who's struggling to hang on to her family's 200-year-old townhouse and support her unstable mother on her grandfather's legacy of $463. There's just one problem. Theo's grandfather was a security guard at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and if the painting is as valuable as she thinks it is, then her grandfather wasn't who she thought he was. So I think this is going to have aspects of an art heist mystery, and I always enjoy books that are centering around a famous painting or the art world in some way, so I think I'll really enjoy this probably during middle grade March next year. And then the last book to talk about isn't actually a new book that I got from my mom, but it's a book from my childhood library that was lying around and I decided to bring home, and that is The Incredible Journey. And this edition is so special because it has an inscription from my grandmother to Chelsea, Love Graham, August 97. I love that she gave this to me in 97 because I was 5 years old and had probably just started reading, and I loved animals so much, especially dogs, so I'm sure she thought that I would really enjoy this story. I would say this is probably considered a children's classic now. I'm sure most of you know the story either from reading the book or watching the movie, but if you don't, it's the story of three animals who walked home. There was Lueth, a young and gentle Labrador with a red gold coat and a noble head. There was Tao, the hunter, a sleek, wheat-colored Siamese cat. There was Bodger, the old, half-blind, tough bull terrier with a strong sense of humor. Three animals who walked and ran and fought and struggled together, who escaped death at almost every step, and who finally came home as though they could never again be parted from the dream of their incredible journey. The Incredible Journey is the best-loved animal story which Walt Disney have immortalized in their world-famous film. So if I'm ever in the mood for rereading a childhood favorite, I will have this now in my shelves here to pick up. So this is the full stack of books from my mother's shelf that I brought home from my summer vacation. I'm really looking forward to getting to all of them someday soon, but if you've read any of them and would recommend them, please let me know so I can prioritize which ones to start with, because as always, there's too many books and too little time. Thanks for watching this big book haul, and until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book. Bye.